Welcome guys, welcome to Virginia Tech. Sorry you couldn't be here in person, but we're going to do a virtual tour of the Helmet Lab. My name is Barry Miller, and behind the camera is Dr. Mark Begonia, Director of Testing, and we're going to give you your tour today. Welcome to Kelly Hall. Let's go on in and take a little look. All right, now we're inside the lobby of Kelly Hall. Kelly Hall is home to the Institute for Critical Technology and Applied Sciences, also known as ICTAS, I-C-T-A-S. In addition, it's also home to the Biomedical Engineering and Mechanics Department, also known as BEAM, B-E-A-M. And within those two entities, we have something that we call the Centers for Injury Biomechanics. And as you can imagine, we study injuries that happen to humans of all types, but we do have three or four primary areas. The first area is we actually have a car crash testing facility. It's called the SLED Lab. It's operated by the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. And as you can imagine, we have crash test dummies, we use cadavers, we study seat belts and airbags and various types of injuries that happen with car crashes. It's a pretty cool facility, it's #1 in the country. Second area, Dr. Pam Vandervoort runs a pressure wave research injury lab, and those pressure waves, that's associated with the military, and these pressure waves are caused by bombs. When bombs go off, they create this big pressure wave, and our military personnel are getting concussions and getting injured just from the pressure wave itself. So that's pretty cool stuff. She has a blast tunnel at the Corporate Research Center that she uses. The third area, and Dr. Begonia is going to pan up there, we do drone research. We have something called the Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership, and they study the flight aspect of all these drones. But with our group, we study injury biomechanics with these drones. As you can imagine, sooner or later, these drones are going to fail and they're going to crash into humans, whether you're walking the dog, riding your bike. And so what we study is how those drones are going to injure humans. And if you think about what's important here is the size of the drone, how fast the drone moves, what's the drone made out of, how heavy it is. And so all those things factor into injuries, and we're helping the FAA and the Mid-Atlantic Aviation Partnership figure out, what's the best thing to keep humans safe before these drones crash. So we call it the Catapult Lab. We crash these drones into head forms and mannequins, and it's kind of fun because the whole drone just explodes into a bunch of pieces. And then the fourth area of research is the Helmet Lab, and so we're going to head on down to the Helmet Lab right now, so let's go. Okay, now we're standing outside the Helmet Lab in the basement of Kelly Hall, 120, and this poster kind of depicts the various types of research we do in the Helmet Lab. And so as Mark scoots in here, so Helmet Lab conduct all kinds of applied injury biomechanic research. You might know us most for our helmet ratings. So sports, football, youth football, flag football, cycling, soccer, hockey. And as I'll mention later in our tour, we're actually in the development stage for baseball, softball, snow sports, equestrian helmets, rugby, headgear. But we do other research, and most of the helmet research is related to concussion. So concussion is a major problem in society today, and we're trying to help mitigate those. And I talked about the drone impacts. So here's a picture of the drone impacting a mannequin. And one other area that I didn't mention is we do a lot of toy safety. We work with several toy companies, Nerf darts, and things that injure eyeballs and can cause other head injuries. So we study those and try to help the companies make those products safer. So as we pan back out, I'm going to have Dr. Begonia turn around here and we'll show you the maps. So the Helmet Lab has some national impacts. We do some K through 12 community outreach, company testing, research collaborations, and all across the United States. So if you back up and take a little picture of the United States map, obviously heavily densely populated with Virginia, East Coast in general, New York, Philadelphia, Virginia, North Carolina. But we do collaborate and communicate with people all across the United States. Some are laboratory research facilities, some are correspondents and people interested in what we do, and then quite a few others are helmet manufacturers, whether they're in the design phase or actually have helmet products. All right, we're going to scoot on down here outside the lab. Not only do we have national relationships, we have international relationships, so we have global impact with the Helmet Lab. And again, the kind of same type of thing, K through 12 and community outreach, company testing, and research collaborations across the globe. And we could probably stick a lot more pins in here, but obviously United States, quite a few. We didn't put all the pins in there, but quite a few there. But if you back up, you can see Germany, Ireland, Australia, China, a lot of manufacturing in China, especially with the bike helmet industry. But again, we correspond with numerous people all across the globe. So it kind of gives you some scope of how important the Helmet Lab is. Now we're going to scoot down the hallway a little bit here. We're going to highlight a few of the posters we put together. This first poster is the hockey helmet ratings poster. And all these can be found, for the most part, on the Virginia Tech Helmet site, www.vt.edu/helmet. But for hockey helmets, we use 4 locations and 3 energy levels. So each helmet gets tested 12 times, and that goes into the concussion ratings. Once we get inside, we're going to talk a little bit about football and hockey helmets shortly here. As I mentioned on that first poster we looked at, we are developing standards and research for equestrian helmets. And so we're working with the United States Hunter Jumper Association on an equestrian star rating helmet project. And so we're anxiously awaiting to get started on that. You guys, if any of you are horse riders, you'll realize that horses are unpredictable. They run at high velocities and you're already elevated, 7-8 feet off the ground. So lots of risk associated with riding a horse, and obviously a lot of injuries associated with horse riding. Another aspect in the equestrian area, polo helmets. Polo sport, they move pretty fast, a lot of balls, a lot of people colliding, and so just like any other equestrian event, quite a few injuries associated with polo. So we've done some preliminary research with polo helmets. They're a little different than your standard equestrian helmet, and so we're working on some preliminary research to figure out how best to evaluate those helmets. Moving down a little bit further, so not all sports wear helmets, and one of our PhD students, Emily Kiefer, is working on research related to rugby players, and instead of helmets, she's actually using mouth guards, and these mouth guards have sensors, and so we're using that data to kind of help measure some of the head impact accelerations. And she's working with our Virginia Tech men's and women's rugby clubs, collecting data. And moving on down, a few more steps down the hallway. And this poster depicts our football helmets research. And again, this can be found online. The current latest, greatest helmets are all updated. And just so you guys know, when we do our ratings, as new helmets come out on the market, we test and rate them and post them immediately as soon as we're done with them. Football is pretty easy because there's not tons of helmets out there. We do have a bit of a challenge with the bike helmet industry. There's tons of manufacturers and many, many models, and so it's been a challenge to keep up with so many in that area. But for the most part, we're up to date with football, hockey, and so, yeah, football helmets are measured, and we're going to show you the pendulum impactor shortly, but 4 locations, 3 energy levels. Each helmet's hit at least 12 times. We do 2 samples, so actually 24. And so a few data points here. Football is the team sport with the highest number of concussions, which makes sense, being a tackle sport. And if you pan over one poster over, you'll kind of see a sample of the Virginia Tech football helmet ratings. These might not be the latest order of the helmets. You'd have to go online. Again, we update those as soon as we test new helmets on the market. So let's go inside and take a look at the helmet lab itself.
Yep.
Okay, now we're going to enter the lab, and the first thing you're going to see is a helmet display. We have football helmets on the left and hockey helmets on the right. So what I want you to do is compare and contrast the 2 different types of helmets, and I'll talk you through some of this as Dr. Begonia films this. So here's the football helmets on the left. As you can see, these are all cut in half. And we cut them in half so you can see the various types of padding structures companies have used to try to help eliminate some of the energy transferred to the head. And I also want you to look at the star values. Virginia Tech Helmet Lab uses a star rating system, and STAR stands for the summation of tests for the analysis of risks. So each helmet goes through a variety of tests, locations, energy levels, and number of samples. And so collectively that star value is a culmination of all those tests. Now what we want to see is a high star value, i.e. a 4 or 5 star rated helmet, but you want the star score to be really low. That score kind of represents the average number of concussions you'd get wearing that helmet if you're exposed to the seasonal average of head impacts for a given sport. And also, if you note price, the cost of those helmets are listed on these. And if you note, cost doesn't always correlate with performance. So a 5-star could be priced accordingly. There's a 5-star helmet right there for $299, which is pretty darn cheap and inexpensive. Again, these were original helmets from 2012 when we first launched the star ratings. If you want to go to the current ratings, go to www.vt.edu/helmet, and that'll take you to our ratings page, and you can see all the latest, greatest helmets listed on that page. All right, now you're taking a look at the hockey helmet display on the other side of the wall. And as you can see, there's a variety of hockey helmets. They're also cut in half, so you can see the padding structures of the various companies and the models that they have on the market. So one thing you might want to notice is if you compared and contrast the football helmets to the hockey helmets, is one thing that becomes pretty clear is that the hockey helmets aren't nearly as thick or bulky as a football helmet. But in particular, you can see how thin some of the padding is compared to a football helmet. And then if you scan down and kind of note the star values, how well these helmets performed versus on a concussion risk scale, so a lot of these helmets do not perform very well at all. So let's take a look at our football player here. And the first thing you notice, helmet, right? In the game of football, most people assume that you're going to get hit in the head pretty regularly in tackle football. And so henceforth, football players tend to wear a high quality helmet. It's nice and thick, it's heavily padded. But then when you look at the body padding, the body armor, we might call it, it's kind of minimal. And the reason for that, as you guys might guess, is speed is critical. Right? You don't want players to be able to easily grab you and tackle you. And so the body padding is kind of minimal, but certainly a nice high quality, thick helmet. And conversely, if you look over at the hockey player, the first thing you notice is the helmet. Well, not much padding in that helmet. And part of that's, hockey players, they don't play tackle hockey, right? So they're not tackled to the ice, but they do hit the ice, they hit the dasherboards, They skate at high speeds, and so you'll notice that there's lots of body padding, shoulder pads, elbow pads, thigh pads, knee pads, shin pads, heavy gloves, and so there is a lot of contact in hockey, and not surprisingly, there's a lot of concussions in hockey. Unfortunately, the hockey players just haven't adopted some of the latest, greatest technology in helmet design as its football players. So if you look at the latest, greatest helmets, I have here a Schutt helmet, Schutt F7. Right, and if you look at the padding structure, notice how thick that padding is right there. So heavily padded, and we'll talk about concussion risks in just a second here. And then if you look at the hockey helmet, this is one of the highest rated hockey helmets. That's the CCM. You notice just there's not as much padding. All right, let's talk a little bit about head injuries. Many of you have heard the word concussion, right? And so what is a concussion and how does it happen? Let's start with the anatomy of your skull and the brain. So here's our nice little picture of a small little brain. Yours looks something like this, but obviously a lot bigger. All right, and what happens? So the brain tissue sits inside your skull, but it's not attached to your skull. It floats around. It's surrounded by something called cerebral spinal fluid. And so it kind of moves and shakes inside your skull. And I'm using, this is my surrogate here, sample, lots of hand washing these days, so use your Palmolive. But if your brain was inside your skull, which is the bottle itself, what happens when my head or my skull moves rapidly and stops? So the soap inside sloshes around. And so we call that linear acceleration, right? So, but also, if I rotated it, that would be rotational acceleration, and if you notice, the same thing happens inside the skull. The brain sloshes around and moves. Well, it's that stress and strain on the brain which causes a concussion. Certainly if your brain impacted the side of your skull, that would probably be a pretty severe concussion, but any of that stress and strain can cause concussion. And so let's talk about how does the helmet work? And so if I told you guys you had to run into a wall, what would you put in front of that wall? Well, most of you are probably thinking, yeah, I'd put a mattress or lots of padding, right? And that's the idea. So what happens is, instead of this abrupt stop, which causes lots of linear acceleration, what if we had padding that slowed down that head or that acceleration? Then we'd have less sloshing and less chance of concussion. So that's basically how helmets work. Two helmets, right? And they're going to impact each other. Let's think about how fast this happens. All right, helmet to helmet, that's somewhere between 3 and maybe 8 milliseconds. All right, so it's a challenge for a helmet to slow down and absorb a lot of energy in such a fast or small amount of time. Again, 3 to 8 milliseconds. If I told you guys to blink your eyes, that's roughly 10 to 15 milliseconds. So these impacts are really, really fast. Now obviously, a head-to-head versus a helmeted or a soft helmet, anytime you can actually slow down or increase the impact time, well, that's going to slow down the head acceleration and reduce your chance of concussion. Right here I have what we call a NOCSE head form, the National Operating Committee for the Safety of Athletic Equipment. All right, so this is a standard medium-sized head form. It's kind of rubber, and it's about the same weight as a human head. Again, most of you have a head about this size, a little over 10 pounds. And what we do is we put helmets and headgear on this head form and collect data. So if you turn it over, inside this little channel here, we slide our accelerometers or our sensors, and then we can mount this head form on whatever test rig or impact rig we want to simulate what happens with a real head. In addition to the medium-sized head form, we have a youth-sized head form. Some of you may be aware we do youth helmet ratings, and so obviously adult size head's a little bit different than a youth size head, and so this is the youth version, so much lighter, a little bit smaller, and simulates that. So with the same kind of design, so we use the same thing. The Virginia Tech Helmet Lab got its beginning way back in 2007, and they got their beginning studying football players. Dr. Duma and Dr. Rosen decided to start measuring head impacts in Virginia Tech football players. And what we used inside this helmet here, if you look inside, we started putting sensors inside these helmets. Those little red rings are accelerometers, and they measure every head impact in real time and record that. And what's important is that that head impact data is paired with concussion diagnosis on the field. So every time this helmet is hit, that data is recorded. And if that threshold's high enough, maybe 80 Gs or better, and we'll explain Gs in just a second here, it goes to a little black box on the sidelines. If you can see that, that's an actual picture of a Virginia Tech football game. And that little black box will send a page or a message, a text alert to the team physician or athletic trainer, and they'll come over and check out the player to see if he or she is concussed. And again, that's paired with the actual data inside the helmet. So as we mentioned with the football helmets, what we're recording is acceleration values, both linear and rotational acceleration values. And what we've found with our over 1 million data points at this point in time, that anywhere upwards of 100 Gs starts to put you in the higher risk of getting a concussion. So what is a G? If you guys remember from your science classes, or maybe you're learning that just now, 1 G is 9.8 meters per second squared. So fairly quick. All right, so to put that in perspective and how fast that really is, so if I had you guys jump up and down as high as you could, that might generate as much as 4 Gs. And some of you guys that sneeze really heavily or really hard, well, that could be upward of 15, 20 Gs. Achoo! And so some of you guys think about soccer balls and heading a soccer ball, and how many Gs do you think that might be? Well, that's about 40 Gs because the ball is fairly compliant. So to get to 80 Gs, it takes a lot of energy. So the Virginia Tech Helmet Lab, we have ratings for various sports, headgear for various sports, helmets and soft headgear. So when you think about soccer, most people think it was the ball that causes concussions, but as we just explained, even with a hard hit soccer ball, the ball's fairly compliant, so the Gs that your brain would receive is kind of minimal, around the 40 G range, so not enough for a concussion. But what does cause concussions in soccer, we found with research and lots of data, is that it's the head-to-head impacts. Two hard surfaces, when they hit each other, cause concussions. So whether it's a head-to-head, head to the goalpost, head to the ground, maybe head to someone's knee or elbow. So those impacts are the ones that kind of cause concussions. And so this test setup's called the head-to-head setup. We use this for soccer, flag football, rugby, and as you can see, what happens is, various types of soft headgear. And so this one's for flag football. All right, so no hard buckles or plastic, typical of this type of helmet or headgear. This is a Visus. This has a little bit different kind of helmet structure, a little bit more rubber. And this is used for flag football. But what we have here with our test setup is we have two heads, right, which we already kind of explained. One of the heads is equipped with the sensors, this one. And when these two heads collide, what we measure is the difference between unhelmeted and a helmeted version of these head impacts to see how well does this soft headgear reduce those acceleration values that we talked about, both linear and rotational. So let's set up a test and you can see how that looks. Okay, here we go. All right, so now let's take a close-up look at that head-to-head impact. Okay, so now that we're done with the head-to-head impact testing rig, let's move on to what we call the pendulum impactor. And as you can see, this is a pendulum. So what we have here is an impactor head that's on a pendulum arm. And what makes this great is if we take that pendulum up to the same exact angle every time, we should have the same energy at impact. And that's important with reliability and validity when we do our testing. So we're going to do a football helmet here. We're going to have a front location. And what happens is, I'm going to energize this magnet. And that's going to hold the pendulum arm. And then we're going to take this up. We're going to do a moderate energy level to start with. About 65 degrees. Call that close enough. All right, I want you to pay close attention to how the head or the helmet responds to this impact. This would be a hit a high school varsity or college player would receive somewhat on a regular basis. 3, 2, 1, here we go. Record it? Mm-hmm. All right, now we're going to do a close-up. Again, this is the moderate energy level at 65 degrees on the pendulum. So let's take a closer look at how this impact happens. 3, 2, 1. All right, let's take one more look at that from a different angle so you guys can see the whole effect. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. On this final test, we're going to take the pendulum arm up to 90 degrees. This is our high energy impact scenario, and what makes this interesting is if you did not have a helmet on during this impact, that would be a 300 G or higher impact acceleration, and that would certainly be in the skull fracture or death category. But if you have a high quality helmet on, it'll take that 300 G plus hit down to the maybe 130 to 150 range, which is pretty darn impressive in such a short amount of time, as we mentioned with these head impacts. So let's take it up to 90 degrees and take a look. All right, gang, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Woo! All right, now we're going to move over to our bike helmet testing setup. And as you guys can see, and you're probably aware of, there's tons of different bike helmets out there. You know, colors, shapes, sizes, configurations, ventilation holes. But I want to point out a few things. I know you guys can't physically touch the football helmet and the bike helmet right now, but one of the first things you notice about a bike helmet compared to that football helmet, extremely light. All right, and then if you actually squeeze this compared to a football helmet, this type of foam is really hard, but it's designed that way. These helmets are used for a single impact, and so what they're designed to do is crush and crumble on impact, and thus if you got into an accident and the helmet was damaged, you should replace that helmet because the helmet no longer can absorb some of the energy that it once did. All right, so some of the new technologies, you're going to see this little yellow sticker on lots of different helmets moving forward. MIPS stands for Multi-Dimensional Impact Protection System. And so what this little technology does, it's this little plastic liner in here. Let me move it for you. And see how that shifts? And what that does, it allows your head to stay somewhat stable as the helmet moves and rotates. So it reduces some of that rotational acceleration we had talked about previously with our football and hockey helmets. So MIPS, so you see lots of that. This other design is very similar. This is called MIPS, but there's also a little SP here, MIPS spherical. And if you notice, when I move this helmet, the inner part of the shell moves independently of the outer shell. And so it's kind of a two-piece helmet, but the same kind of principle applies that, you know, if your head can stay stable within the inner part of the helmet as the exterior part moves, that will help reduce some of the rotational acceleration that your skull and brain receive. So there's a couple other technologies out there, not just MIPS. This is the LEAT turbine system, and these little blue pucks are in here, and so they rotate and move. And again, the same concept applies here, that hopefully your head can stay a little bit stable as the helmet, the exterior part of the helmet moves and absorbs and slows down some of that impact. All right, so now we're going to show you the bike helmet test rig. So if you look here, so repeatability and reliability is really important with how we test. And when we can use gravity, we always want to use gravity because it's very consistent. If we take this up to the same height each time, we have a little digital readout, and then we know exactly what the velocity at impact is going to be. and so we like to use gravity. And if you happen to wreck on your bike, you wouldn't fall straight down. Your bike's moving forward in a horizontal direction, and if you fell off your bike, you'd probably impact the ground at some sort of angle. Well, roughly it's about 45 degrees angle. And so what we've done here is we're going to drop vertically, but we're going to drop down onto a 45-degree anvil that simulates how you'd actually wreck and impact your head on the road or trail. Now we also put a little bit of sandpaper on here, and that's going to be important because the sandpaper is going to simulate the grit of the road. And so if I have two smooth surfaces that impact, nothing really happens. They just kind of glance off each other. But if one surface was very textured, i.e. sandpaper or asphalt, what happens is when your helmet hits the asphalt, it temporarily grabs that helmet, and what's going to happen is it grabs that helmet. It's going to cause it to rotate, right? So that friction or that texture of the ground is going to really increase the rotational acceleration that your head might receive. And so we want to best simulate that as we can. All right, so now we're going to run a test here. We're going to take it up to a moderate energy level, but before we do that, Dr. Bogoni is going to zoom in on the poster here. And this might be a good time for you guys to pause the video and take a look at some of these statistics. Cycling far outweighs the number of concussions in any sport or any team sport, so go ahead and take a look at some of these stats. All right, so let's run a test here. All right, you guys ready? We'll give you a couple different looks at it. 3, 2, 1, here we go. All right, now we're going to take a closer look at this bike helmet drop. 3, 2, 1. All right, let's do it one more time. Third time's a charm. 3, 2, 1. All right, as you notice, a bunch of helmets on the shelves here. A variety of helmets that we've tested over the years. We even have an old helmet here. This is the Atlanta Falcon helmet. So this was actually an NFL helmet. And if you can take a quick look here, there's kind of the inner padding of the old school way of absorbing some of that energy. These were water packs at one point in time. Obviously they've broken and there's no more water or gel in them, but very stiff, kind of hard. But for the most part, the shell of the helmets haven't changed too much. There's a few technological changes, but again, here's a nice variety of Boise State helmet. There's another old helmet from the 80s that had some sort of water bladder in it. Foam was a little bit different structure. So lots of improvements in today's helmets versus yesteryear. A couple other things people have tried. They've tried to put some sort of exterior shell on top of the helmets. This is called the Guardian, and so what this was designed to do is strap that onto the helmet, and it provides an extra little padding, and so that might help with some of the linear acceleration and soften the blow of some of these head impacts. This version's kind of a harder shell, really just a kind of thick piece of rubber, and that also can go on the exterior part of the shell that people have tried to design. I guess that's backwards, so something like that. Panning over, football helmets weren't even worn in the early 1900s. It wasn't until around the mid 20s or 30s, I guess, that there were so many concussions and deaths in football. They said, well, we need to do something, and so they came out with leather helmets. And as you can see, there's probably not a lot of padding structure in there, but that's what they used until about the late 60s, early 70s. And that's when these polycarbonate shells first came out. And again, for the most part, these polycarbonate shells, they're hard plastic shells, haven't changed too much. Obviously the padding structure inside has gone through evolution. There's some, previous shots that we showed some of the latest, greatest technologies, but for the most part, the plastic shell has been kind of a mainstay for 30 years now. Let's talk about some other sports we're looking to launch. We're doing some equestrian helmet research. We'd like to have a star rating for equestrian helmets. We're working with the United States Hunter Jumper Association has agreed to help fund that project, and so we're anxiously awaiting to get started on that project. I don't have any snow sport helmets up here, but we are venturing into the snow sport helmet, working with the USA ski team. Lots of head impacts in the snow sports, particularly with the freestylers, and so we're actively collecting data on that population as well. Again, hockey helmets, lacrosse helmets, we've done a little bit of testing on a variety of helmets, water sports, baseball, softball, catcher's gear. Again, those are some baseball, softball, catcher's gear. But if you guys ever have questions, you can go to www.vt.edu/helmet. My contact information is there, as well as Dr. Begonia's. Reach out. We'd be happy to respond to an email or a phone call. But we'll conclude our virtual tour for today. We apologize for not being highly professionally done, but it's the best we could do under the conditions, and we hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, and have a great day.